This is Lost in Electronics. Today we're going to actually go over basically one of the more requested topics through forums I've been reading and just on a basic how-to. We've went through on how to do Black Arch, which is probably one of the better security testing add-ons for Arch Linux. But if in case maybe maybe you want to just get into basically into pen testing or security testing, but you're not familiar on either Black Arch or you don't want to learn how to install it, this is more of a if you want a more I'm gonna say easier. I can't say easier to use, but a different distribution on security testing tools. Normally, I would still recommend Black Arch, but again, this is a more requested topic on how to install Kali Linux. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to actually need to go to kali.org. All you have to do is there's two ways you can install. What you can do is you can install either the Kali Linux 64-bit or download it through a torrent, and it's about 4.1 gigs. I already downloaded the file, but you can always see here because here's the ISO. So if you're going to, for example, if you want to install to actually allow to install is not on a virtual machine, how you would install it, I would recommend a great program called Etcher. This is the GitHub page, and if you want to go to their GitHub page, it's going to be here. You can see it github.com/blena.io. You can actually go to directly to their webpage, which is going to be blbalnea.io/etcher. And this is their webpage. If you want to use the Flash tool, it tells you how to download it for your current operating system. I am currently using Linux, and I went into and followed their GitHub repository on how to do it. So I clicked on, since I had the closest to my distribution is Red Hat, so I clicked on that one here. It took me to the GitHub page, and since I followed the exact instructions on how to install it under Red Hat, here is the how to actually grab the widget for it and wget for it, and then here's the repository, and then I followed the sudo dnf install y with the name of the program, so that because that way can there, and this is if you uninstall it, there is the directions right there, and this it does break it down based off of what distribution you're using there. I personally, and that's for Mac, Linux, and also Windows, they do have instructions on how to go through pretty much every operating system imaginable to be able to run this. So going after this here, so after we download the image, we're going to actually go ahead and we're going to go and know where we have to make sure we know where the file location is. Since I already downloaded Etcher here, all we do is actually currently running it, so you can see it's been running in the background, and here's Etcher. You would want to go and click on the file you want to flash. In this kind of case, we're going to go ahead and go to the kaliinstaller.iso. And it's going to say, okay, select the drive, and then we would hit the button that says flash, and it would just go and reflash that with Kali Linux. I don't need that right now, so I'm not going to go ahead and flash, but this is how you basically go in there and actually there. I'm going to go ahead, and the next portion of it is what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual machine, and we're just going to install it kind of like what we did with Arch. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and go to our programs, and we're going to go to our virtual machines. It's going to ask you for your login to be able to log into the device so you can use your virtual machines. Make sure you remember your passwords, of course. Okay, and this time we're going to go ahead and go file. We're going to go to we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to go ahead in this case we're going to go ahead and go to new virtual machine. We're going to run it through a local. Select the media source here. We're going to go ahead, and this time we're going to browse, and then we're going to go and look for our directory. So we're going to head and we're going to make a new one here. So that we're going to what type of operating system you're going to install here. We're going to closest we're going to do here. Let's see if it has Kali in here, and it most likely it won't. So we're going to go to the closest we got here is going to be Debian. So we're going to select Debian 10 forward here. How much memory you want to use? Let's go ahead and give it a. Let's go ahead and give it a nice. Let's say. Let's give it around 4 gigs of the RAM here. How many CPUs? We'll give it 4 cores to use. 20 gigs. So next we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our settings here, and we're going to go and go to virtual CD-ROM. We're going ahead and CD-ROM's right here. We want to go and browse for images. And we're just going to be looking for our ISO file. So we're going to browse local. We're going to go down to our downloads folder. This is why you want to make sure you know where you stored your files at here. In my case, it is downloads here, so it's going to take me a moment to get over to that directory. And it's going to take us a few moments here. This way it's always a good idea to make sure that you know where you placed your documents here. We're just going to look for the Kali ISO. That is not any of those. So we're just going to go and make it easier way for us. So we're going to go ahead and go and grab that image so I know where it's at. We're going to head and go up to my computer here. And we want to grab this one. So we're going to copy that in a directory where I know. So I'm going to stick this right now. Stick it in my documents is fine. Now we can go ahead and hit apply here. So we're going to have to tell it to shut it down. So we're going to tell it to shut down, or in this case, we'll just go ahead and do a force reset, yes. And then we're going to go ahead and start this back up. Kali image, good. Virtual machine. Good, everything so far is looking proper. We need to make it tell it to have our boot options, and we need to enable our boot menu. Apply. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and first shut down. Let's go ahead and do a force shutdown right now, yes. Good, what we'll do here, now let's go ahead and hit play. go. So we got into here. So we're going to go ahead and do it. We'll just go ahead and say we'll do graphical install. Okay, so it's going to take a few moments. We may have to shut this down again here. Make sure we got the hard drive placed in the proper area. Now we're going to go ahead and we're installing this here. We're going to, and since I'm in the United States, we'll go ahead and select English. It's going to take a few minutes to install the operating system here. You can see it takes a little bit to install it here. Here in a moment, it's going to ask me to create a login here so we can actually get into the machine here. It always takes a little bit of time to install an operating system. So install a virtual machine of Windows. This is pretty much the same way you want to do it, but I don't know why you'd want to install a virtual machine of Windows, but that's in case you would for some reason. That's a good way we can be able to do it here. Let's keep the host name as fine as Cali. We don't have a domain name, so let's go here. So user, we're going to call it Lost in Electronics. This is my channel, but you can name whatever you want for user. I always use this, make it something pretty. Right now, it's normally a good idea to make a strong password. For right now, I'm not going to do that, but just for testing purposes. This is where you're located at. Now it's going to configure the Ntp server so that we can actually pull the clock and information here. That's going to be important if you ever want to do any kind of updates here. So we're going to go, normally you want to go, and probably if you're actually using it for normal purposes, you'd probably say I want to use entire disk and set up encryption, because that's going to be your best way for security. But in this case, we're just going to hit continue, because we don't need that. I'm just going to be using this for testing purposes, so I'm not really worried about too much. But normally you'd want to probably encrypt that drive. We're just going to let them have we're going to let them pull the full drive and let this kind of set up a partition, but you can mainly set it up if you know how to set up a partition table for it. Continue. So it's going to take a few moments for everything to start installing here in a second. And it's going to install the operating system, go through the whole directories, and it's going to take a few minutes for everything to install, especially if there's a lot of programs. You can always check out when you're waiting for this to install here. If you're on another computer or you install like a virtual machine like I am, it's a good idea. You probably can watch my other video on about what great plugins to be able to use it. So when you get Firefox installed and you can actually utilize it to make sure that not only do you have our wonderful pop-up blockers, but you can make sure you can force HTTPS and how to make sure you have some security so that a lot of these it makes it a little bit more difficult to be able to use some of these tools on Kali Linux to be able to try to target it. So that way you know your own security security measures. And this is also good. Again, this is a good time saying installing Kali is meant for educational purposes only. It is not to be able to use for anything other than that. So we're not responsible for anything you decide to use that is not there. These are meant to be able to know how to utilize the tools and how to do it in a test environment. So make sure before you use any kind of tools, make sure you get permission from whoever the user or whoever you're targeting, and make sure that they basically give you permission for doing it from the legal standpoint. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment anything else. That's if you have any questions about any kind of local laws, you might want to consult whoever your state or local officials are for those to be able to get any kind of information on what kind of options they have for secure. From that standpoint, only thing I can be able to provide is make sure here's how to be able to install the tools. So it's going to take a few minutes here for this to install. This is a good way, again, if you have like an IDS system you want to audit, or you're maybe working for a company and you need to audit their network. Normally, Black Arch has a little bit better tools for that, but again, that you do have, these are going to probably want to be everyone, most likely if you have some kind of computers networking systems class and learn about security, you're probably going to, most people are, the most well-known operating system for testing is for Kali, for offensive security, but again, that doesn't mean that you have to use them. There's Parrot, there is Black Arch, there is Kali, which is the one we're using, besides like Parrot, and there's quite a few other ones. You can really use pretty much any distribution. As the question is, what do you want your best? The Gentoo has some security testing tools. We want to build it that way. It depends on what you're there. Probably the most people are either going to be most familiar with is probably Kali Linux, but again, you can use the same tools by using Black Arch or even Parrot. So it depends on, do you want just something that you're just going to run for security testing, or do you want to have an operating system you want to use on an everyday basis? If you're looking for an everyday basis, you're probably going to want it more like Black Arch, which download an Arch and then install in the Black Arch repository. Or if you're trying to use, or if you're trying to make it say, or use Parrot. But if you're trying to just use it for, hey, I want to run this test, or maybe I want to do a lot of hack boxes and I want to have some tool sets to be able to do that with, then Kali Linux is probably your best option for that. But again, if you want to actually have a daily driver and you want a little bit more tool sets, then I'd probably recommend something like Parrot or Black Arch more than I'd recommend Kali Linux. But this is a good way if you learn how to be able to use the tools. And there's a great, this is not an endorsement or an advertisement. I don't have any affiliate links, and all these are my own opinions. There's a great service that's called Scribe. We'll go ahead and go through that in another video on. It's just a very inexpensive how to get books on how to be able to, is audiobooks, but they also have a whole bunch of other books and scripts and anything else, and it's fairly inexpensive. So those are the things that if you're looking for services here, and we'll go ahead and go through that one in our future videos about going through Scribe and all the wonderful things they have. So if you want to be able to look forward to seeing that, you may want to turn back into my channel. The other thing we're going to eventually have here is the next couple of videos is we're actually going to have a video on how to, I have a Gigabyte motherboard, so I'm going to have a how to do the firmware update. They do have 60A out for a firmware update for my motherboard, so we'll go ahead and show you how to install that and with some of the new features on it. It's really meant for the new processors, so again, these are just does it give you performance advantages? Yes, if you have 3600 memory or above, the motherboard update does work. I updated because I was having issues with the last firmware update for my motherboard that just didn't recognize any of the solid state drives if I plugged them in there, or any kind of physical hard drive more than my NVMe drives. But so since after I did the firmware update, everything did fix the problem. And again, these are not always user recommended unless you got the new processors. But again, my Ryzen, basically my Ryzen 3900X, it works really well on it. And with my Navi 1 video card, I noticed that there was a little bit of performance advantage since I did the new firmware update. But again, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to help everyone. And again, anytime you do update your firmware, you may potentially run into problems. That's just at least my personal experience with it. And again, every system update and every kind of hardware can change. So right now I am currently running on the machine, and we'll go ahead and in our future video series we'll go ahead and show you what my machine looks like, what kind of hardware I have. I'm just going to basic rundown. So far I have a 3900X processor made by AMD with a gigabyte motherboard. I have 64 gigs worth of RAM on this because I use all four of them. I'll go ahead and go through the companies who actually make my RAM here. And we'll go ahead and go through some of these parts I've listed on there, for like my two MVE drives that I have. I also we'll also go through who the manufacturer of my RAM is. I am completely I both have an AMD. I had a video card and also one that is going to be in an also processor. So again, it's not that it's you can use pretty much any kind of hardware you want. NVIDIA makes really good video cards. So does both AMD. Both of them make fairly good video cards on them. It depends on what your usage and what your needs are. From the price range, I have always liked AMD, but again, it doesn't always. Intel also makes really good processors as well. Just generation looks like AMD is going to have a slightly better performance, but again, that can always change at any time. But again, I've always used it because I've usually liked the price per performance better on the on an AMD. Also, since I am doing a lot of video editing and not just only playing games, and I use multiple other sources, I am preferred the AMD. And it usually for Linux support, I've been having a lot better luck with using AMD processors, with also on top of that using AMD video cards. I've had a lot better driver support, and it's a lot easier to be able to get anything from like Hashcat running to run something like Counter-Strike there. On Windows, you're probably going to have a problem with their kind of hardware you have, but yeah, for Linux, you're going to have to be more particular because you need to know what's going to work with it there. Now, if you know how to program your own drivers, then you're probably not going to have too many problems. But again, you have to find support for whatever kind of hardware and what chipsets you use. So it's a good idea if you are using Linux, which is I strongly encourage using everyone to use Linux, and especially if you're going to be trying to do any kind of security testing, it's a good idea to know all operating systems, but especially using anything from on the Linux side of everything. If you're trying to get in your IT certifications like CCNA or anything from to using just like even getting your A plus with some basic certifications. If you want to get anytime you want to get into like a server administration, unless you're using like Windows 2000 directories, you're probably going to find some form of Linux. If you're trying to, Linux is never going to hurt to run, because if you look on background of most routers out there, unless you're using something like a Cisco iOS or using something with like a Juniper, you're most likely going to find some kind of Linux-based operating systems on them. So it is a good idea to learn them, not only know where the directories are, but again, if you're doing any kind of security testing, you're probably going to, most servers you're probably going to run into, they're going to probably be, if you want to have anything that from a corporate network standpoint, you're probably going to be looking at more of anything with a some form of Unix or Linux on them, to be more than you're going to find anything with using any kind of other operating systems. But again, if you're doing security testing, knowing more like how do you go through Juniper, knowing how to use iOS, but using what they consider Cisco's operating system. Because again, if you're going to be trying to do any kind of security testing, you're going to need to know the multiple environments. Because if you can get into a system, if you don't know how to route through that system, it's going to make it very difficult to be able to do anything or exploit or run anything or do some testing. So it is again important. And more information you know, the better off you're going to be. There's a lot of free resources out there for people there. It doesn't always mean you need to get an IT degree to be able to do it. If you're going to get in a professional environment, you're probably better off getting some of your certs or even a education. But a lot of times, most companies are going to look for your certifications more than anything else. You do have the experience. If you want to get into higher end jobs, like if you're going to go to like systems manager or something higher, you may need some more education. The best thing to do if you want to be able to see what kind of requirements are for your whatever kind of job title you're looking for, go to the job ads and look up what their minimum requirements are. That will give you an indication of where you need a kind of starting point of looking for where you need to go from here.
Again, I'm not an expert. I just do tech support, but again, it doesn't always mean that there. I have had went through college for. I have found some basic college on information technology, and also I have been working with computers for multiple years. I've used multiple operating systems because again, more environment there is. The other thing is getting kids in early into knowing computers. Something like with either like starting with like a Raspberry Pi, or even if you have an older system, install some Linux version on it. Get your kids into some form of computers because a lot of times that environment is going to help them. Even if they never really plan to use or go into anything that has to do with it, it's going to be a good thing to know. Not only from a security standpoint, but again, it kind of gives them there. Every one of my children, I have basically introduced them to computers really early. They've done very well for not only from the job standpoint, but also from knowing how to go through their everyday life, knowing the computers and break it through there. Most of my children started with either something like a Raspberry Pi or older computer, and they've learned a lot. Again, I've grown up with computers for part of my life, and if it wasn't for an early introduction, it does make a huge difference. Dude, if you don't have children, it's a good idea to really learn it. Everyone at any age can learn. I'm still learning about everything. I'm not an expert on every single field, and again, you always learn new things. The problem is when you think you're the best at something, there's always somebody better. So just keep on improving. Again, just reach out to community. More you have, some more people you have like interest, it's easier to get into things. Again, I personally try to be able to kind of give back. I try to go and join the forums and stuff on to um, and try to go to like Facebook forums or other forums out there and help out people that are maybe newer to do the basically to Linux. So because the biggest things is that you don't is a community. Don't create as a toxic community. But let's go ahead and work together as a group to be able to kind of work through everything. Because again, everyone's going to more we know about it, and the more we help each other, the more that's going to get this thing out there. Especially if you want to try to get away from Windows, more we get into more people using some form of Linux, the more gaming support, the more you're going to have it where it's going to have companies that are going to start adapting to try to realize that everyone's not just using Windows and kind of adapt to those environments. So again, that's from a mainstream thing, and that also help out for security standpoints. There's a lot more things we can do in Linux to give you customizations. There's things in Windows you cannot. They're kind of locked down on their source code. So if you have some problems, you can't just randomly fix it really easy. The nice thing with Linux, you can very easily do this. So again, now what we're going to do is it's going to ask us what kind of desktop environment we're going to use. I want to use the default one that it recommends, but again, you can use any kind of desktop environment you want to use here. I've used on one of my machines. I'm using GNOME. Other one I'm using KDE. So we're just going to we're going to use the one it recommends here. Continue. Because what that is the basically what how does you want your GUI or graphical user interface to look like? You might want to look at each one there. We can go use the examples. If you want to use the one this is GNOME in the background that I'm using. That kind of looks like if you want a computer pretty much looks like a Mac almost everywhere else. Then you're probably going to want to use something like GNOME. If you want something closest to Windows, you're probably going to want to use KDE because that's going to have a very much of a Windows feel to it. So, and if you really want to save resources but still use the tools, you're probably just going to want to use something like i3. It goes really quickly, but again, you have to learn more of the commands. So it depends on what environment you feel is best for you. Again, if you're trying to start out, it depends on what environment you're familiar with. If you're familiar with more like Mac, I'd probably recommend using GNOME to start out with. If you're more familiar with Windows, you might want to use like KDE because it's going to have a very Windows feel to it. And you have any nice thing about Linux, you have customizations are where is it's whatever you want to be able to make it. And this nice thing about it is there's a lot of things that you can be able to install. A nice most Linux software is free to use. They don't have that's the nice thing about the community. There, everyone has a lot of free based software. The GNU licensing, that's the big one. Look for if you support anything that uses GNU licensing. So because that way allows it so the community can grow and support each other's files, and that way we don't have it something that everyone can edit. So that way we can be able to use there's a lot of companies you probably don't even realize that use some form of Linux. Great one is Tesla is a good example of a company that uses Linux in their vehicles. PlayStation uses Linux in majority of their background of their forms there now for their consoles. If you look at some of the older versions, you'll see the kind of the interfaces on there. So places that may have either Windows banned or very regulated, the best thing to use is some form of Linux, because it's not like you can get cut off there. It's not like they're going to stop. It doesn't mean that somebody may not stop supporting them, but if they do, you can always go and change it. It's not like you don't have the source code open to everyone. These are not closed-based source codes. It's open, so everyone can be able to edit them. So that way, if you run into a driver problem, you can edit the driver if you need to, or you need to run them. Granted, the downsides and up things on that. If everyone can look at the source code, you can also see any more errors, but the advantage of doing that is everything can get patched a lot easier because you got a bigger community looking at it. It's going to take a while to install here. What we're doing is installing step by step here so we can go through it. So if you want to see what it looks like in here. It's always a good idea to start virtual machines. It's easy to restore them in case you run into problems. You can save the images. And guess what? When you're done with them, it's easy to delete them. So make sure you install the guest images on there. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to see it on full screen. But again, if you want to use things like Hackabox and those other things, if you want to make sure, it's good kind of idea to separate your main operating system from your security testing tools. One, it's a little bit better for security standpoint, and two, if you do run into problems, because a lot of times they may have random updates, you don't know how they're going to affect your system, and nothing like trying to upload your next YouTube video or try to use them maybe as a daily driver and try to go, maybe you need to write a Word document or something else you may need to do, and you can't get into it because the system's crashed. So it's a good idea to sometimes the nice thing about virtual machines is that does give you the capability to kind of test and see how everything works before and add it into an environment. And knowing what your actual uses are is going to be the big one. Just because the fact you can I install Kali Linux, I may not have to need to use this tool. So if I'm not doing security testing, there's no point in installing Kali Linux. This is just for security testing tools, and it's one of the more well-known operating systems for it. It's based off of Debian, which is the thing. If you want to use a Debian-based operating system, and you install some of these same tools, you can download Ubuntu, or you can download Debian. So there is a lot of different choices you do have and different distributions of the operating system. So it again depends on what feel and what you want to look at, and then that comes down to what packages you download and what you're trying to run. So knowing what you're trying to do is going to be the biggest thing before selecting an operating system. You need to figure out what your task is to do and what your main end goal is. If you're just going to go and try to do an audit network and you just need Wireshark or you just need Nmap, you can install those on anything. You just need to install just the tools, and no point in trying to install Kali. Now, if you're trying to use some of that additional web testing tools, or using some things that default and you're using you're just mainly basically if you're basically a penetration tester or a pen tester, then some of these tools may be more coming in more advantage of if you're going to use this on a daily basis to audit networks. But if you're not doing that as an auditing networks, you're probably better off downloading some other distribution and just installing the tools over top of it. Again, if there's a way for some of these tools have security vulnerabilities on purpose, because of the fact that these are security testing tools. So again, just because that they have them on the machine you can also potentially make your machine a little bit more vulnerable at the same time. It's going to take a while to install everything here. and know what type of pen testing you're trying to do. Know what you're trying to audit. What do you want to get into? Are you trying to do more web applications? Are you trying to do operating systems? Are you trying to do servers? Are you trying to go through routers? And it depends on what going through those next things. So it's good. You need to know what you're trying to target. So you need to know your OSINT before you can do anything else. Operation intelligence. Know what your target, know what your information is, and know what there is. So there's a couple different ways you can always look at it. Most of the times, the most common ways is what they call a phishing attempt. It's what most things that you're going to be looking at that when you're trying to do any kind of things, which is, do you know that target? Can you identify who that person is so you know how to be able to get him to either click on a link or them? Or if you're more likely, if you're trying to do an audit on the network, can you convince enough people to show on that test server that that you can send an email out there? That's why it's very particular to make sure that you look at sites, like make sure that if a site, like for example, it says HTTPS, because that's important, because you don't have the S there, then you don't have security there. There's other things you can always look at here, and this is one of the things we kind of went into one of the other topics in the past here on to make sure that you're not trying to run scripts in the background. JavaScript can be malicious, and it's not as easy for somebody to embed things into that JavaScript, or basically misspelling some wording of a site. So make sure when you're going to google.com, you don't go to Oogle or Soogle or some other thing by blundering some of the or mistyping that website, because again, those can cause issues. These are tools out here that allows you to clone websites in here that allows you to do this. Again, this is not only for testing purposes, but again, these, if you know what to kind of how to test it, you know also how to look out for it. So auditing yourself is never a bad thing. If you want to learn how these tools are used, go set up a virtual machine and attack that virtual machine so you know how these tools work. Set up a virtual machine in Windows or Linux, and then have another one as a remote, or looking at downloading like a darn vulnerable image. So there is Hackabox. You can always download and look at those and follow the tutorials on how to do a Hackabox, because those are how you're going to learn. Read books on how to be able to utilize these operating systems better. The more you know about how to there, and then you can go into the same thing if you know how to use like something like IDA, or using something like there's other forms there you can look at and read inside that firmware that you can allow to know maybe what's going on with it. You may know, hey, there's a backdoor into the software. Maybe that gives me an indication. Maybe there's like a master key. So, for example, I want to get into a Bluetooth lock. I may not be able to get into it in case I'm on a network, and then I can have the key they may build in software. Or I can look at, hey, this is how the software works. So if I get if I'm doing a corporate maybe on a corporate network, maybe someone does if they try to ransom a machine, then you may be able to look at how that machine, the ransomware works, or you may be able to reverse it or trigger it so it thinks that the server doesn't exist, or have it act like you are the main key and try to sit there. So it doesn't say you're going to solve everything by trying to de-encrypt it, but there is things into reverse engineering, sometimes malware, that you may be able to do to be able to help out with trying there. Or you may look at the signatures and make sure you can try to tell to something like snort or a rule set to try to block it, or even have it so some other or Sericata to have some rules that look out for that. So there's other things in IDS systems you can use. Knowing, also looking for phishing attempts. Yes, Kali Linux does have a lot of tools to help you with phishing there for emails to kind of audit networks. But again, there is some of the things you can also do to kind of audit yourself. Go basically have a made bot that you may be able to create that you can put in to make a phishing set and send email to yourself and see if you recognize that. That way, you know it's not going to go to your own server, but that kind of gives you an indication and kind of be on the lookout for headers or information. Look at certain things, because they're going to be targeting based off of what you're going to use. They're going to make it look like the CEO even though emailing you instead of there, or say something's urgent or needed, or especially wanted, or this needs your immediate attention. Click on these links. Those are keywords that you may want to look out for, because again, it's all about security yourself. Make sure you use password managers. Don't reuse passwords, because again, after you learn how to use Hashcat, you realize how vulnerable the networks are and what there's. Everything is look at things like haveibeenpwned.com is a good thing. We'll go ahead and go through one of these sections in the future on how to go through Have I Been Pwned here. Pretty much this is going to install here. After it gets installed, we're going to finish and let it to reboot here. We're going to get about halfway through this. I'm going to let it continue because we don't need to watch every directory install get in there. And at the end of this, all we're going to do is have it so that we can go and click on finish, and then the machine's going to reboot. I'm going to allow it to run in the background here, and then on the next episode, we're actually going to go and how to actually log in and do some basic updates. I've had another video if you want to check out on to how to use it's just like it's a Raspberry Pi, since this is another Debian-based operating system, on how to be able to do the updates. So if you want to look at that previous video there, you will have it how to install and how to update directories based off of that device. The Raspberry Pi with the Pi-hole video has a little bit of how to install them. It doesn't mean you have to run a Pi-hole on a Raspberry Pi. You can have any kind of Linux-based distribution and run it the same way. The same thing if you use Hass.io or one of the other ones, you can run those anything. Normally wouldn't recommend running over top of basically Kali, but again, you put like Ubuntu or one of those things else and reinstall it. You have some other kind of tools, because a lot of times most if you want to use most of the Pi distributions are based off of Debian, like your a lot of your like Buster, one of the other versions of the Debian operating system. Same thing if you're trying to use Ubuntu. So those are one of the main core ones you may recognize here. So I'm going to actually drop out. Well, this is going to be the end of the video, and we're going to be able to continue in this in part 2 on one of my next videos.